most people overfocus on the outcome rather than what's the environment that produces the outcome. Locker rooms are a great example of it. Marriages are a great example of it. Any sort of teams are a great example of it. Like the environment that we produce is actually what influences and generates the outcomes.
And I'm in love with the good life. Can't give it up. Make it to the top. Keep climbing. I wanna live it up. The good life. I'm coming up. I'm coming up. The good life. Good life. Oh, good life. Good life. Good life.
Boom, coming in hot, Chinchy. What's going on, brother?
Coming in hot, dude. I don't think you'd be a married man right now without the guest we have on today, dude.
Actually true. The guest we had on today married Sarah and I just a little over a year ago. And, this guy is really my mentor. He's my life coach, but he's also a really dear friend of mine. So grateful for him. Author and life coach. If you love reading and you want to make, you're looking for ways to take your life to another level, this book of New Man Emerging that Michael DeSanti wrote a few years back is pretty incredible. So you might want to go check that out. But without further ado, let's bring him in. Michael DeSanti. What's up, brother? Friend of the show too. This is your second time on inside the mayor's office, which is nice for us.
I'm trying to move up to number one. You gotta let me know. You gotta let me know how many I need so far to advance up there.
I think you might be tied. Coming on the second time, we've had a couple second timers, and you're one of them. But brother, it's been an incredible journey. Obviously, having you in my life and all the cool things that we've done together. But this past weekend, we went down with a group that you run called the Inner Council that I've been involved in for over a couple of years now. Such a great group of men. I mean, what an unbelievable group of men. And also my son Andrew being in the Inner Council too is so great for me. But going down to Asheville, North Carolina this weekend, and realizing that, man, there's a lot of devastation down there in Asheville, North Carolina. I had no idea that it was that bad. What were your takeaways from the weekend with the guys and your takeaways with, what was going on down there in Asheville?
So a few things, as you're talking about the group that I created a few years ago, what I figured out, or what I've realized that I've really tried to work a lot of my work and design a lot of my work around, is that as men get older in life, our connections and our friendships tend to diminish. Right? If you think about, when you're in school, when you're in college, if you play a sport, you go to work, okay, you build this camaraderie and you build this, but as we get older, they tend to actually decrease. So I wanted to create this group of growth-minded men, good men that want to live principled lives and be of service to themselves and to others and improve their life and their marriages and their health and their families. Let's get together and let's work on living a good and principled life. So we started that. Case has got to be 4 years ago that I started that. And it keeps growing and growing. And there's these unlikely connections of guys that probably wouldn't be hanging out otherwise. But then we get together twice a year, live in person, do service for the community, meet every Friday via Zoom, and really go through some of the highs and lows and the successes and challenges of life. So that has been a major honor for me to lead a group like that of the men that you guys are. Yeah. Getting together, one of the things, first and foremost, I don't think there's any substitute for being together. I think it's great, technology and Zoom and phone calls and all that stuff. I think it's great. There is no substitute for when growth-minded people get together. There is no substitute for it. AI hasn't figured it out yet. I don't know. We'll see how the great simulation goes. I don't know. So first and foremost, getting together is critical. The other thing, we had this plan of being, going down there. We had booked Asheville months ago before the storm. Then the storm happened. We had to pause and kind of see the landscape before we decided to go or pivot to something else. And once we committed to going, all of a sudden, everyone was like, all right, if we're going to go there and have 16 guys together at once, how can we be of service? Everyone was of the same mission. It was like, we can't go there and not help out. And as soon as we decided and committed to going, everyone just got on the page of, all right, where is our effort best put? Which was interesting because we were going to do some big project of like rebuilding a bridge or something big. And then some weather issues happened and we couldn't do that. And one of the local guys in the group was like, you know what? I got a friend whose house is destroyed and he really needs help. And what was so fascinating to me was this random guy was, on Thursday tearing out floorboards by himself. And then on Friday, 16 random guys show up to his house and he's like, what did I do to like get this gift? And for us, I remember thinking like the night before we were talking about challenges that we're going through and, in our whatever in life, some area of life. And then the next day we go to help this gentleman out that no one had ever met. And that day, when we left, we were like, you know what? I'll take my problems back. It really gave a perspective of, that old saying of like, if everyone stood in a circle and threw their problems in the middle, everyone would take their own right back. It gave us a perspective of like, when you're in service, you put your differences aside, you put politics aside, you put, agreements and disagreements aside, and you just go with a like-minded mission. And to be able to help this father of three, and being a young father myself or having a young son myself, like, man, to just go in and be of any level of service, even for a brief amount of time, I think really moved everyone's spirits, including his. And that was really important. And then the other thing is, camaraderie. I was talking about it a bit this weekend. Camaraderie isn't a guarantee from just being together. Camaraderie happens when you overcome adversity together. That's why teams or people in the military or people that have gone through hard times together, that develops camaraderie. Just being hired at the same company does not develop camaraderie. You've got to actually overcome something hard together. So when we get together, we do workshop and exercise and things like that actually challenge us. But we do it in a group, and I think that deepens the bond and that builds that camaraderie that I really think especially a lot of men are missing as they get older in life. Like overcoming challenges in groups is a critical component to growth.
It's so true. I also, the adage, the one phrase you hear all the time is you become the average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. I really believe when you start to get around men or guys that are looking to better themselves. And, it is funny because that group couldn't be more different. Those 16 guys that are in the inner council, I would never, ever be like, dude, you're going to be my buddy. You're going to be my friend. You're going to be my friend. It's amazing how, when you get a group of people together that are trying to, bridge the gap in life, It is amazing the bonds that you can create.
There's like, I said it all weekend. I'm like, what a band of misfits. What a band of misfits. But the common thread is everyone wants to grow.
Right.
Everyone wants to grow as a man. Everyone wants to grow as a father. Everyone wants to grow their business, wants to grow their health. The common thread is growth. Yeah. And when the common thread is growth, the differences are negligible. Like it doesn't matter. Without the common thread of growth, then we can get hyper focused on, well, you voted differently than me and this and that. And then we get lost in all the noise of life rather than what's the deeper signal of the mission. The deeper signal of the mission and the common thread is everyone just wants to improve their life, improve their state, improve their inner well-being, provide for their family, be as good of a man as they possibly can be. When that's the main focus, the differences just fall aside.
It works the other way too, right? Like I can assume, like to give a baseball analogy, like the Dodgers locker room culture was a lot different than the White Sox locker room culture that they may have had. Like, does the negativity, does it happen in an equal and opposite way, or is it even more when it's on a negative side of things, when you surround yourself with people who maybe aren't the best influences on you?
Well, there's going to, okay, so the environment generates what shows up in the environment. So if the environment is toxic and negative and finger pointing, I can guarantee you those are going to be the results. When the environment is a clear mission is vital, clear roles vital, and clear execution and systems vital. Well, and then that is encouraged over and over and over again, and it's adapted and polished and evolved over and over again. You just generate different results. You can't do that with either an environment that isn't conducive to it or people that aren't conducive to it. It's an impossibility. One of two, it's going to go one way or the other. But most people try to I'll say it this way. Most people overfocus on the outcome rather than what's the environment that produces the outcome. Locker rooms are a great example of it. Marriages are a great example of it. Any sort of teams are a great example of it. Like the environment that we produce is actually what influences and generates the outcomes. Most people try to start with the outcome, and I'm like, it's not going to happen. You got to start with the environment.
I love that, man. And one of the big things that we talked about in the first time that I really met you was in your Find Your Tribe group. The first week we talked about domains.
Yeah.
And it was something that I remember you saying, we all think we want success. If I just make enough money, if I make $1 million, couple $1 million, everything else in my life will be taken care of. My health, my marriage, my finance, all this stuff, everything will be great. And you remember you saying that, we have 6 domains: your health, your financial or career, your family, your friends, your spiritual life, your leisure life, and then your most intimate relationship that you're in. And a lot of what we do a lot of times is we think that if we're rich and that equals success. And I think a lot of men and women think this in life. If I can just make all this money, then my health will be okay. My marriage will be fine. I'll have great friends. My spiritual life will be good. And that's not the case. I think a lot of times we're chasing success, but what we really want as men is fulfillment. And you've always said that, man, you want to get those domains of your life, those 6 domains, to at least the 3 where it's, okay, this can be improved on, but you really want to live at that scale of 1 to 5, that kind of 4 or 5. Can you talk about that for a second, Mikey, before we get into what I really want to talk about, and why is that so important, the domains?
Most certainly. So domains are anything in life that require love and attention and are played on an infinite field. That's my definition of a domain. It requires love and attention, and it's played on an infinite field. So therefore, the things you just listed off, your health is a domain. It requires love and attention, and it's played on an infinite field, meaning you're never going to get to some plateau of your health and you're like, oh, I'm done. Great. I'm going to just ride out the next 30 years. I don't have anything else to do. Like, it's constantly evolving. Your marriage is a domain. It requires love and attention, and it's played on an infinite field. Your marriage in the first year and your marriage in the 50th year are not the same. It's evolved. So there's no like plateau that we reach in domains. We're like, oh my God, thank God, I'm done with this. It's not. Fatherhood is a domain. My boy's turning 2 next month is different than when my boy's going to turn 22. That fatherhood is going to evolve. It's played on an infinite field. And so it requires love and attention, meaning the fastest way to harm a domain, ignore it. You want to effectively harm your health? Ignore it. You want to effectively harm your children? Ignore them. You want your marriage to crumble? Ignore it. It requires love and attention. And so that's how we highlight a domain. Now, where I think a lot of our culture has some wires crossed is we've collapsed together success and fulfillment. So what you said, Case, is completely accurate because it's in a lot of my old thinking, which I think is part of some cultural conditioning. Just go be successful and make a lot of money, and that's going to overflow into all of the other domains. And I'm like, actually, we have proven countless amount of times that that's not true. In fact, what we find are some people with the most amount of success and money and wealth have actually very deteriorated marriages or very deteriorated health because they actually had to compromise so much to get it. Now, what we want to distinguish is success and fulfillment. There's nothing wrong with success, but it is very different than fulfillment. So there's two ways that I coach this. If you want to be successful, be really, really good at one thing. Be really, really good at one thing. For you, hit a baseball. Great. Just be really, really good at that. You will be successful at it. But if you want to be fulfilled, you've got to be dynamic. You've got to know, when do I put energy into this? When do I throttle it back? When do I shift and pivot to this? When do I throttle it back? How do I harmonize my life? So success is now an accomplishment in one domain of life, but fulfillment is when all the domains of my life receive the appropriate amount of love and attention. So that I'm dynamic enough to say, okay, I go and generate money here in my career and my wealth, and then I pivot to the addressing love and attention in my marriage, in fatherhood, the relationships that matter to me, my spiritual life, my leisure or passion domain, my other relationships, my health and well-being. Like, that's a whole different way of operating, rather than, I think, the conditioning that we're sold. Like, if you just fill this one cup, everything else is going to work out. And I'm like, after that doesn't work out, those are the guys that I coach. Now what happens is like, wait, I don't understand. I made it to this mountaintop. I did what everyone told me I should do, and I accomplished what everyone told me I should want. And I'm like, yeah, but the void didn't go away. As a matter of fact, look around, there's probably a lot of collateral damage. You may have ignored your health, may have ignored your marriage, may have lost friends that you really cared about. Your spiritual life may have deteriorated. Like, it's a different way of approaching life. And then how do I now harmonize all of those, rather than, all right, let me just like rob Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. Like, let me focus on this now, and then when that gets really, really bad, then I'll pay attention to it. That's not the path of fulfillment.
That's so true. Like, when you say like dream job, oh, I got my dream job. I don't think I've ever met anybody who got their dream job, and then when they got it, weren't like, oh, this might not be my dream job. I mean, I can raise my hand on that and a couple things that I've done. And it's like, wait a minute, I thought this was the end all be all of my career, but I don't like it here and I want to go somewhere else. That's a crazy, thing that happens.
And it happens all the time. I thought that once I got to this plateau, everything was going to be smooth from here. I wrote it in the book Case, like, even in a marriage, like the day you say I do is the day your work begins. We think like, what? We got married, like we should just ride it out from here. I'm like, no, the work now is when the work starts. Right now is when you actually make that domain an arena of your life, and an opportunity to give and receive love and communication. Like, that's vital. But it's like, once we got married, like I thought, oh, my work is done. Like, no, your work just began.
Right. Well, that's where you're leading me perfectly down the road that I want to go today. Because obviously, we could talk for 10 hours about some of the incredibleness that's. We could talk for 100 hours of what's going on in Michael DeSanti's brain. I promise you that, and the the influence that you have, But the one domain I do want to focus on is marriage. We talked about it a lot, and and you have 5-6 rules of marriage that you talk about, and I'll tell you what, success leaves clues also too. For you, the marriage that you have with Alyssa, and I've seen it, and I know that the principles that you live by in that marriage are incredible. And you obviously talk to a lot of guys about your rules of marriage. I just listened to your podcast, Lessons for Luca, right? Lessons for Luca is your son, and you have a podcast that's on YouTube, I believe, and other places, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast. So everyone out there, listen to that. It's an incredible podcast. But you were talking about the 5 rules of marriage, and with the 6th a bonus one too. Could you talk about that a little bit? What are the 5 rules of marriage? I know the first one is throw away your scorecards. Maybe we can go down and talk about that. And where'd you come up with these? And how did you develop this, brother?
Yes. I think similar to anyone that has been successful or fulfilled at anything, most of us came up with our systems of success through failure. So, by messing up would be the short answer. By messing up previous relationships, I came up with what I call my 5 rules of marriage. The first thing I think is important to maybe parse out a little bit is the word rules. Like some of us have what I call an unconscious inner rebel, and when they hear the word rules, they're like, "No way, not me! Take the rules away." I'm like, actually, when we have rules and guidelines, they actually create systems of safety and systems of cooperation. So for you as a baseball player, the reason that you could go to Japan and play baseball with people, let's say you don't speak any Japanese and they don't speak any English, the reason you guys could actually cooperate and play the game is because there's rules. If the sidelines and 3 strikes aren't guidelines, they're rules. And without them, things are just left open to interpretation, right? So to develop rules and then actually live by rules and have agreements on rules is actually it creates systems of cooperation and safety. So they're not something that my wife and I impose on each other. They're something that these are guardrails for us to know when we're successful and when we're not. And so I came up with these years ago. My wife and I are actually coming up on we're together 9 years, coming up on 5 years married. But I remember thinking, what are the common threads that make our marriage successful? And if I were to coach that, what would it look like? And for us, rule number 1, throw away your scorecards. You mentioned it before. A lot of times people unconsciously get into relationships, which is funny because it's like the person you love the most, but then unconsciously a lot of my baggage from my history, now somehow we're in competition together. And I'm like, wait, why are we in this friction? Throw away your scorecards means we're not here to keep score, we're here to both win. And so if I am unconsciously keeping tally and keeping score of I did this and you didn't do that, so therefore I'm 1 ahead and you're 1 behind, at the end, even if I win, we both lose. Throw away your scorecards means I've got to let go of all of the tallying that I'm doing of keeping track of what I'm doing versus what my wife is doing. No, at the end of the day, did we both win? Great, we won. That's it. If you start to make your marriage a place of competition, it's going to deteriorate. A marriage is really a place for radical cooperation. And the guardrail of that is at the end of the day, you both win. And sometimes I pull extra weight. Sometimes my wife pulls extra weight. It's also it gets rid of marriages aren't always 50-50. If my wife is going through a hard time, great, I'm going to step in, I'm going to pull the weight. Maybe it's 70-30 for a few weeks. Maybe she's going through a challenge that she gets to have a process of mourning or grieving of something. Okay, great, 70-30, here we go. And the vice versa might be true for me. If I'm sitting there unconsciously you know what, I did X, Y, and Z and you fell short over here, it's going to cause an unconscious friction. It's unnecessary. The other thing too with throw away your scorecards is I always jokingly say to my guys, the majority of the arguments you've ever been in your marriage are actually in your imagination. It's the lead up of well, then she said this, and I know if I say this, I already know she's gonna say that, and then your marriage becomes this mental chess match of of game theory of if A then B and if B then C, and I'm like, bro, just throw away the scorecard and practice radical cooperation. It's fundamental for a quality marriage. Number 2, second rule, expect nothing, request everything. I don't know, your listeners, there's guys I've coached that I've never met their wives. Doesn't matter. I can guarantee whoever's listening, if they're married, I can guarantee they didn't marry a mind reader. They didn't. And so for me to expect my wife to know exactly what I want or need is setting her up for failure and me up for disappointment and resentment. Expect nothing means I get to make requests for everything. Means like when I have an expectation, it means I have a want or a need without the courage to communicate it.
Wow.
That's what an expectation is. There's an old saying that says if you want to be miserable, have expectations, or if you want to destroy your relationship, have expectations. And what request everything does is it actually ignites the courage in me to say, hey, listen, there's something I feel I need or something I feel I need, I want. I got to access courage to that to communicate it. And what that does is it takes it takes the language away, which a lot of people fall into friction in marriages, which is you should just know. I shouldn't have to tell you. Well, if I knew, then I would do it. So maybe you have a higher standard of this or that than I do. So if there's something you need or want, you've got to request it of me. You've got to communicate it to me. Stop assuming that I know or can read your mind, and vice versa with my wife. We have different standards of cleanliness. We have different standards of scheduling. We have different standards of everything. So how would I know exactly what it is that my wife wants unless you actually say, hey, this is what I need or want? So we have this open communication of request everything. If I start to expect things and I start to think like, she should just know, I'm only setting myself up for disappointment and resentment, and I'm setting her up for failure. Even if she gets it and nails it, it's how often, what's the percentage of that? I mean, it's going to still be very, very low. So we live by expect nothing, request everything.
I love that. I love it. It's the old phrase too, unknown expectations are future resentments. So true. Like, you didn't do what I said you were going to do. I was like, I didn't even know. I didn't even know.
I didn't even know. How was I going to know? Like there's big things to that and little things to that. Like we make little requests on everything. And we also reinforce that channel is always open. Like if you need something, request it. Now, if you request it over and over again and I follow through on it, I'm already now going to know via practice and exercise what your standard is. Like we have this, it seems trivial, but like we have this sink basin where like the sink can have like multiple like sprays or what. And I remember my wife was like, oh, simple request. After you clean the dishes, can you put it on the just regular stream? This way, when I turn it on, I don't spray myself everywhere. And I'm like, oh, great. Now, here's the thing. When I follow through on that request, two things. My wife feels validated and heard and respected. And then I have like a promise I could live into.
It's taken me 10 years to learn how to load my dishwasher. I swear to God. I think I just nailed it. We're married 10 years last week. I just got it right on the last load of dishes. So I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. And also, too, is like request it over and over again if you need to. Repetition is part of learning. What language do you know that you just heard once and now you're fluid? Like there's sometimes like my wife has to request it over and over and I'm like, oh, now I finally got it. It's 10 years on the dishwasher. Great. If it takes 10 years, great. Request it over and over again. But that's different than I'm expecting this for 10 years and I'm just going to seethe over it for 10 years. Like, hey, there's times I just wanted to remind you, this is a request of mine. Great. Okay. You guys think about it. You lived your life for X amount of years. Your wife lived her life for X amount of years. And then you come together and you're just like, what, destined to have utter compatibility? Now there's some things that you got to communicate and request out. Make sense?
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you said too. It actually takes courage to request. I think sometimes when you start tiptoeing, especially in a marriage, you start tiptoeing, that fear comes in and all of a sudden you're like, I'm just going to let it go. I'll just let it go. I'm not going to say it. That doesn't work. No. It takes courage to actually ask for what you want and request. And I think that obviously brings the communication tide, makes it a lot stronger, and the trust becomes more.
And what you end up doing is you give each other a blueprint of how to love you best. Like that's actually where expectations ruin relationships, is that I have a blueprint of how to love me effectively, but I'm not going to give it to you. I mean, how mind-blowing is that? That would be like, there's rules to a game. I'm not going to give you the rules, but I'm going to punish you when you don't abide by them. Like, that's insanity. It's complete insanity. So what we're really doing with all of this is we're giving each other a blueprint of how to love me best, which is very unique to each person.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Love that. Love that.
My third rule of marriage is give each other the better bite. Like, and there's a literal and figurative to this, but like my wife and we're big food people. Yeah. And like we're big foodies. We cook a lot. We love restaurants. Like I'm sure you guys know, like when you look at a really good meal and you cut a bite, you're like, oh, that is a really good bite. Wow. What we do is, like, rather than eat it, we give it to each other. And that's where this actually came from, which was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to give you my best bite, but here's the thing. I know my wife is going to give me her best bite too. And what it does is it constantly reinforces that we have each other's back. Again, going back to competition, like the world is competitive enough. I don't want to come home to my home and have to compete there too. It's like, I know that my wife has my back, and we promote encouragement. We promote, positive feedback. Like I know that my wife has my back. And my wife knows I have her back. She knows that we're looking out for each other. I know that we're looking out for each other. And what that does is that creates a positive overextension. That I'm going to live my life today, and I'm going to go about my business. I'm going to go about my work. I'm going to go about all my responsibilities. But I'm always going to keep the person I love most in mind. Like, how does my schedule affect my wife? How does my travel affect my wife? Or if I have this opportunity, like, hold on, let me give her the better bite. Let me make sure that she feels considered in everything that I'm up to here. So we're always looking out for each other. That's a huge part of our rules of marriage. Like, if I don't feel looked out for, I may make up stories about being unappreciated or not respected. And when we overextend ourselves mutually, not unhealthy, but mutually, we're always reinforcing that we have each other's back. So that's give each other the better bite. Fourth rule of marriage, this should be hard for you, Case, but my fourth rule of marriage is always set your default to laughter. Right? Like we all have baggage. We all have blind spots. We all have old demons. We're all at the heart. I feel that at the heart of the human spirit, we do want to grow, improve, and ascend. And none of us are doing that in a straight line. So throughout a marriage, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to run into blind spots. We're going to run into shortcomings. We're going to make mistakes. If you set your default to personal, you're actually going to be defensive and postured up. But if you set your default to laughter, you really give each other patience and grace. We're all going to make mistakes in marriage. There's no handbook to marriage. There's no handbook to parenthood.
Right.
So when we set the default to laughter, it's like we get to laugh at ourselves. We get to laugh at our mistakes and our shortcomings. It's not laughing at each other. It's laughing with each other. But a lot of times, if that default isn't set to laughter, then we're just like, I can't believe you did this and you did that on purpose and you did that personally. I'm like, how is that benefiting our state? It just leads to finger pointing and posturing up and being defensive. You set the default to laughter. You're like, you are not going to believe the dumb mistake I made today. And unfortunately, you might actually be in the crosshairs of that. Like when you set the default to laughter, it just brings the walls of defensiveness down.
Yeah, I must admit, I mean, obviously, my wife, Sarah. I mean, she is a super funny person. And I must admit, one of the things I really believe one of her superpowers and our superpower in our relationship has been that, like setting the default to laughter. We laugh a lot, but even the times when I mess up, I'm like, and then she come at me with just bust my chops, joking around. I'm like, oh man, it feels so much better. You know what I mean? More than anything.
Yeah, I think that sense of humor to have together is a massive part of compatibility. Massive part of it. Like, I mean, think about a relationship that either you're in or forced to be in. Maybe it's a work relationship or something like that, and they don't get your sense of humor is brutal. So imagine a marriage where you're like, your default is to seriousness. I'm like, oh my God, like it's what a grind, right? Like so a big part of compatibility is humor. And if you can both consciously set the default to that, it really it offers each other a lot of grace and patience, and it just brings the temperature down of posturing and defensiveness.
Love that.
Fifth rule of marriage is listen to understand rather than reply. A lot of times when in a marriage, in any partnership, there's going to be certain things where your worldview collides, and there'll be friction. Doesn't mean that the friction's negative or bad. It just means that I have a personal view of the world here, and you have a personal view. That is so interacted and dependent upon like your personal history and your experiences, and there's so much upstream to the way you see the world. You're not going to marry someone that sees the world exactly the way you do 100% of the time. Never going to happen. That doesn't mean you're right and they're wrong, and that doesn't mean that they're wrong, you're right and they're wrong, or vice versa. It just means that there's a little friction of the way that you interact with yourself or with the world. If I listen to respond or reply, I'm not really genuinely listening with empathy. Empathy is the willingness to understand where someone is coming from. That doesn't mean I even relate to it. It just means I have a willingness to understand how you see things the way you see them. Sympathy requires, I actually do relate to that. But empathy doesn't require that you relate to it at all. At all. So you may not relate, you may even disagree, but when you listen to understand, what you're doing is you're collecting data, not to respond, you're collecting data to say like, you know what? I actually see and understand why you have it that way. I see and understand why you would relate or interact with this event the way that you did. I may have chosen a different way. I may not have even seen it. But as our partners are speaking or as our partners are communicating, if I'm just sitting here like, yeah, well, just waiting for my rebuttal, I haven't heard anything that my wife has said. And that doesn't lead to more connection. That leads to disconnection. And so anytime in a marriage where you're like, how is what I just said, that's what you just heard, is because you weren't really listening with a willingness to understand it all. You're just postured up, listening to create your rebuttal as though like this is a court of law, like you're going to rest your case somewhere. No, just tell me how you have it. Let me seek to understand it. And if I have something to say, I will. And if I don't, sometimes the remedy is, yeah, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that true so many times too? And in a lot of our domains, I think about sometimes religion, like how we're like, I'm right, you're wrong. Let me tell you why. It's like I think that's the lowest form of anything in a relationship. I'm right, you're wrong. Hey, let me tell you why. It's like, you're not even listening. There is no dialogue here. It's just, I'm right, you're wrong. Let me tell you why. And if you don't see it my way, well then so be it.
Worst case, bang, you're dead. Yeah, that's the worst case. But if you think of it, it's like opinion is not a high form of intelligence simply because everyone has one. I have an opinion. So does the schlub down the street from me. He's got an opinion too. Empathy is a high form of intelligence because I'm now willing to understand a different point of view than my own. If you want a successful marriage, you have to have empathy. It's a skill set. It's a high form of intelligence. So to seek to understand, now all of a sudden I'm suspending a bit of my worldview to try yours on. It may be that you open up a blind spot and I actually do agree with it. It may be that I disagree with it, but I understand where you see it from. I don't think most marriages end due to lack of love. I think most marriages end due to misunderstanding. And so if we don't seek to understand, then we just posture up. And now I only have it the way that I have it. And you only have it the way that you have it. So we got to figure out, oh, how do we do this? But if you seek to understand, it just diffuses the situation. You may agree, you may not. You may agree on some, you may disagree on other. But disagreement does not equal lack of love. It just means I interact with something a little bit differently than you do. That's all.
That's good.
That's all it is. Bonus rule is not just for marriage, it's for everything. Bonus rule, sixth rule is be your word, keep your promises. When you're your word and you keep your promises, you create not only self-esteem in yourself, because you said I was going to do something and you followed through on it. When you keep your word to yourself and to other people, you build trust and respect and accountability and dependability and effectiveness between you both. If I know that if you give me your word and that word is your bond and you follow through on it, every time you do that, you create a solid connection between us. So every time now I take you at your word, it builds dependability, reliability, trust, and respect between us. Those are very firm foundations to have relationships on. Same goes with just you and yourself as well. If I say I'm going to do something and then I do it, I build self-esteem, self-respect, integrity every time that I do that. So in a marriage, if you say you're going to do something and you follow through on it, you build and strengthen that trust and respect and dependability. Those might not sound like the sexiest of qualities, but they're very necessary to have effective teams and marriages. There's no way around it.
Well, and what I love about these, you're right. They're very basic stuff that you're doing all the time. And one of the things you always say is master the mundane. Yeah. Master the mundane of the everyday. You know, I talk to Chinch a lot too about protocols, about processes, about like what are you doing every day to to serve in the marriage domain, to serve your wife. Like every morning I make Sarah a little drink. Every morning, I'll send her a text or what do you need? I mean, I go out of my way in some of these in it now to be like, okay, what can I do to do these mundane things today in making sure that I'm not taking them for granted. I'm not taking this domain for granted, that it's like, we're good. She loves me. I love her. Let's just see you tomorrow.
Great example too, because most people think that a good life is as many peak experiences as close together as possible, right? Like that's what most people think a good life is. Like, oh, we have all, we go to this country and we do this. And in my career, I hit these accomplishments. I'm like, let's be generous. If you are fortunate enough to have 1,000 peak experiences in life, that's being generous. But here's the thing, that still means that the majority of life takes place in the mundane. The majority of marriage takes place in the mundane. The majority of your career takes place in the mundane. The majority of pinnacle health takes place in the mundane. If you don't master the mundane, then we're constantly like, when's the next peak experience? When's the next peak experience? But if you can master the mundane, then now peak experiences don't become an escape from the everyday mundane. They become an enhancement of it. So if you can master the mundane in your marriage, and every day it's something as simple as a note, a drink, and I love you, and what do you need today? And then you go on some great trip, you're just enhancing the mundane, rather than like, all right, how do we grind this out for another 3 months before the flight to Italy? And you're like, I don't know. Like, right? If you master the mundane, now you've got these rules, these guardrails and guidelines where it's like, hold on, let me make sure these are sound. Then when the peak experiences come, it's only an enhancement of your marriage rather than some escape from it.
So good, man. So good. Master the mundane. You've told me that years ago, and believe me, I have that. I think about that almost every day, and the health of your domains is so important. This one with marriage, or any relationship. If you're in any relationship out there, it just have to be marriage. But any relationship that you have that is your most intimate one, these are incredible rules. The 6 rules of marriage by Michael DeSanti, which is incredible, brother. Man, I can't thank you enough. for your time today. And I'm hoping we can do this more in the next, we could make this, something that's a little more regular if you'd be up for it.
I'm up for it, man. If there's value that for your listeners, then I'm here, man.
Man, you're the best, dude. I have so many other things to talk about, but obviously we'll do it again. And bro, I love you. I love you tons. Where can our listeners find you though, man?
You can find me on my website, all my offerings, workshops that I do, the groups that I run, the coaching that I run. You can find me on my website, michaeldesanti.com, Instagram, Mike_DeSanti, and Facebook, Michael DeSanti.
I'll throw that in there in the copy for everybody if you want to click on it.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, and dude, you got some great stuff on Instagram. I also did the Inner Freedom workshop that you did down there in Florida a few months ago with JD.
December 12th to 15th is the next one. Really, really, really powerful and valuable workshop.
Really powerful and valuable. If anyone out there is looking to have their life, impacted big time, I mean, get with Michael DeSanti down at that Inner Freedom workshop in Florida, December, 12th through the 14th?
12th to 15th.
12th to the 15th. What an incredible, I think I did it in April. It was very, very, very impactful with JD and I. So thanks a ton, brother. I love you. I'll be talking to you tomorrow. I think I'm with you tomorrow morning and Friday. So, so I'm looking forward to it. And we'll do this again here soon, brother.
Much love.
Thank you.
Sir.
Yep.